People often ask, where does the scorecard come from? It's not the case that I just make it up based on what I think about poverty. If we're going to make a scorecard for a given country, say Mexico, we go and we get a recent national household expenditure survey for Mexico. And these are complex surveys that cost millions of dollars. It's really scary what they do to the respondents. They may interview them for 3 hours on 5 different days over a month, get these very detailed measures of expenditure. We take those surveys that have already gone through all this expense to measure expenditure, and we say, okay, here's how much these households are consuming each month. Is it below $1 a day? Is it below the national poverty line? Okay, so now we know for all these households in the survey whether they're above or below. And we also know what they cook with, what their toilet arrangement is like, do they own a toaster, all those sorts of things. So then we can statistically relate their poverty status, whether the expenditure is below or above a poverty line, with the things that they have or whether they're employed, et cetera, the poverty indicators. So the actual points in the scorecard and the relation of those points to the risk of being poor all comes from data. So it's not something I make up. It's quantitative and it's based on a specific country. We don't take Mexican data and apply it to Guatemala. The scorecard is on one piece of paper, one side. It could be on a handheld, could be on a cell phone. As far as I know, it's not yet. I'm sure it will be eventually. There's 10 questions. They're all simple, verifiable, objective. So the loan officer or the field agent, someone goes and visits the client in their house and asks, the questions. What do you cook with? And they say, well, we cook with gas. And you look and they're cooking with firewood. So you say, well, is it firewood mostly? And they say, yes. And then you mark. So there's 10 questions. In 5 or 10 minutes, you can mark all 10 questions. Each question's answer is associated with a point value. So maybe if you cook with firewood, it's worth 0 points. If you cook with gas, it's worth 8 points. You have a point value for each of the 10 questions. You add those up. You get a score that's between 0 and 100. Then that score you can relate via the National Expenditure Survey to the likelihood that someone is poor. So if I look in the national survey, all the people that scored 0, if 98% of them were poor, then if I go and score somebody today and they have a score of 0, then I assume they have a 98% likelihood of being under the poverty line. So we relate scores to the poverty likelihood. You take that poverty likelihood, you interview some sample of houses. The sampling is important. But you interview, 200, 1,000 households, whatever it is, all your clients. Take the average of their poverty likelihoods, and that gives you the poverty rate for the whole portfolio. Once you have that, then you can report that to funders. You can compare that to where you were last year and look at change or improvement. It summarizes their socioeconomic status, and you then use that for management purposes. It doesn't, make decisions for you, but it gives you information for better decisions. Challenges with poverty scoring have been very similar to challenges with any sort of reporting function. So if you're having financial reporting, people can cook the books, right? That's why there's auditors in principle. So if you're having poverty-related reporting, it's simple for the organization, if it's collecting its own data, to say, well, all of our clients cook with wood, even though a third of them cook with gas. So there's a data veracity issue. And that apparently is a fairly major issue, because a lot of times the MFIs probably correctly believe that their chances of funding partially ride on their poverty rates that they report. And usually, and this would be a second challenge, is that usually the poverty rates that are measured by poverty scoring are much lower than what the organizations have reported or actually believe. So commonly they say, 80% of our clients are poor, probably 20% are poor. And so, of course, their first response is that this poverty scorecard doesn't work. What's wrong with it? We're in South Mexico, not North Mexico. It doesn't apply here, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to go through explaining to them that, yes, it's probably not the scorecard. And there's still a challenge, even though we've simplified this down as about as far as it can go. It's not totally turnkey. People have to work a little bit to understand it. And so that's not always easy. Taking the average of a group of probabilities is not intuitive to everyone. So it's still a technical tool in the end, and that's not always easy to do. It's best if you have some little software to do that. It makes it a lot easier, and there is some very simple things. But any sort of software project this isn't turnkey is always a big one. The other one is analysis of it. This one Indian organization, they interviewed 80,000 clients, and then they came to me and said, what do we do now? They didn't even know how to compute the average poverty likelihood to get the poverty rate, let alone then relate that to other things that might be of interest, right? taking the results and analyzing them in a meaningful way is difficult, just the same way that doing financial analysis and relating it to, how are you going to improve as an organization is difficult. You have to have some analyst there who understands the tool and understands the business, understands cause and effect or not, and has some ideas about it, and then can put all that together. So how would I train analysts? The easiest way I found is to sit down with them. Once they've got some data and they want to do something and they have some questions about their organization, how poor are our clients, what can we do to improve? Is it true that our rural clients are poorer than our urban clients? Would it help if we focused on women instead of men? Sit down with them with their data and actually do analyses with them. That's the best way that I found to train. The problem with that is it's very one-on-one. The other thing we've done is the people that are interested, they send questions. Here's what we've done. Does this make sense? And then we say, well, here's a better way to do it because we're not ignoring whatever you're ignoring or whatever. So far the trainings in actual analysis has been very much one-on-one. And I guess there's going to be some papers on this, but I think, most people don't sit down and work through all the examples of the papers. If you did, you'd be a tremendous analyst at the end. But if you just read through it, I don't know how much it's going to do. So the scorecard has 10 indicators, and these vary by country. So each country's indicators are based on the country-specific national expenditure survey. Now, it turns out that household size, type of toilet, type of fuel for cooking, whether someone has salaried employment, there's certain things that matter in almost every country, within some range of income, right? There's some variation, right? In Latin America, blenders are somehow important quite a bit. In Southeast Asia, having some sort of draft animal tends to be important, but it's not important in Latin America. So there's a very high level of commonality among the indicators, country to country, but it's not because someone or myself said these 10 indicators are some universal law that came down from God and these are our best indicators. Every country we start from scratch. But because every household has to do, they have to eat, they have to cook, they want to get an education, they want employment, they have to go to the bathroom, they need water. Since those households are incredibly similar in that way, so the indicators usually turn out to be very similar. It's very interesting to me because people in the north of a country will always say, well, this scorecard applies to the whole country, and we're different in the north from the south. But my gosh, I can show with data that they're not, and they're not that different from their neighbors, etc.